because there is mobility in our lumbar spine. There is mobility in that 12th vertebrae particularly. And now we work on finding the muscles, engage and release for the stability. We're going to place your feet on the floor and come into constructive rest. So when we do the pelvic tilting, we recognize that when we do a tilt forward, so you're lifting your low back, that is changing the shape of your waist, right? Because your lumbar spine curve is increasing. Let's do that just a few times. But I want you to focus on the space from the top rim of your pelvis in the backside to your ribs in the backside. And as you breathe in, you can breathe to your belly. Think of lifting that area off the ground. So it's the same movement that we would do in a pelvic tilt, but focusing on lifting the back. Lift the back waist. If you had a pair of pants on, unless they're low hip huggers, you would be lifting your belt line off the ground as you breathe in and dropping it back down. So what we want to recognize when working with the lumbar spine is when we're doing this, what we call a back bend, or we're taking that curve into a deeper bend, we're actually making space in the front of the spine, because the front of the spine is, I call it the stira, it's the steadiness. It's the discs, and we're making space in the discs as we do this. So if you have lumbar back problems, a lot of time this can help to relieve it by lifting. I'm lifting from my rib cage and the lumbar spine itself. Versus the back side of the spine, the vertebrae, those bony protrusions are coming closer together, right? Now let's go the other way. So feel your breathing out. Sense your breath, your exhalation. And now as you exhale, think of that same area, so the waist, the top of the hips to the bottom of the rib cage, and gently press that area in. So I'm not as much moving from the pelvis, lifting my tailbone. In fact, I don't want to lift my tailbone. I want to push my back into the ground and keep the tailbone long. And then I'm going to inhale and just release. And so this is creating that flexion of the lumbar spine, which is what we used to fold forward. And what we recognize in the spine is the stira, the front is the discs. We are now compressing those. So when we come into a forward fold, we compress the front of the spine, and we make space in the back of the spine, which I like to call the sukha. Stira and sukha are two yoga words that mean steadiness and comfort or sweetness. Sukha actually means sweetness versus dukkha, which is pain. So we're creating more space in that side of sweetness, or where we find our mobility in our spine. And you're just exhaling and gently pressing the back waist into the ground, and focusing on doing that not from lifting the buttocks off the ground or the tailbone, but pressing back down. Just do one or two more of those. So we've found now the flexion and extension of our waist. Now let's find the lengthening of the waist, or what we call the side bend when I was standing. So we're going to start with making the left side the long side. So think of the space from the top of your hip to your bottom of your rib cage. You can even touch those. And you notice, I'm going to have you take your leg long first. Take your left leg long. Push through your left leg and notice how you'll feel that lengthening through your side waist. And then just let go. If you want to do this to your breath, you might push on the inhalation and let go on the exhalation. So we're finding our movement, our potential movement, and then we're going to take this into one happy movement that we'll do all together. But I'm lengthening through my leg right now. Sooner or later, I want to see if I can do the same lengthening from the muscles in my waist. So I'm going to go back to knee bent, foot on the floor, constructive rest, and focus on that area. I'm not pushing through my leg anymore. I might have to push my hips slightly forward, but I can also think of drawing my hip and my armpit away from one another, or think of drawing the top of the left hip and the rib cage away from one another. And that's creating that lateral bend, that side bend in your spine. you might notice, because the left side of the spine, if you could see it right now, the left side of the spine is more spacious. The right side of the spine is compressing. And I'm lengthening the left side by drawing the armpit and the hip away from one another. So that is lengthening the waist. The other way I could lengthen the left waist, and I'm going to turn towards you, is not by moving the left waist, but by moving the right waist. So if I think of shortening the space from the top of my right hip to my armpit or my ribs, if I'm thinking of just the waist area, if I shorten the right side, the left side lengthens, right? It has to happen. I'm still creating that same lateral curve in the spine. But I'm doing it by engaging the muscles in the right side of the body, in the right waist, and then releasing. And there's a fine discrimination between using your waist muscles and using the muscles around the pelvis. So if I find that I'm pushing into my foot, or I feel a lot of action in the back of the hamstrings or the buttocks, then I know I'm trying to use pelvic muscles. We really want to use more, when we think of the waist, we're talking about mainly our oblique muscles here. We have the internal and external oblique muscles. And we're drawing up and we're releasing. And you're getting the same results as if you tried to lengthen from the left side, but you might feel it more or feel it differently by shortening the right side. And then take just a few more of these. You're going to continue to lengthen the left side and shorten the right side, but make the movement by combining the two sides both doing something until it's just the right pleasant experience for you. So you might slightly lengthen left and also engage right. And you can even hold it there for a few breaths, and then just let your body slide back to its neutral position. But the focus again is on the waist. And you can think of the waist in the front. It's that soft area to either side of your navel center, wrapping around the sides of the body. Get your kidneys in the back there, so you can think of moving from your kidneys. And then relax. Come back to the center, just notice the two sides. And then we're going to do a lateral bend at the waist, where we're lengthening the right side and shortening the left eventually. But first, take your right leg out long, shake it out. Feel your right side from the top of the hip to the rib cage. And you're going to push through your foot. So initially, you're going to use the power of your leg to lengthen. Feel how the whole leg goes forward, or the whole leg and the hip. So you kind of think like you're plugging your thigh bone into your hip to get the waist to move. The other side is, notice if just the leg moves and there's no mobility in that waist, right? Is your waist able to lengthen as you push through your foot? Or you might feel it because the left waist is shortening. And then let's see if we can make this same movement, but from the waist itself. So right foot back to the floor. Think of spreading apart I think of my skin, like stretching the skin from the top of the right hip to the ribs. It can be a really small movement. And then releasing. So now we're making space in the right side of the spine and compressing the left side of the spine. Take your time, just experiencing that lengthening of the right waist by actively engaging, but also lengthening, right, through the right waist. Remember that muscles can be active, short or long. So in this case, the muscles in the right waist are long and active. And then we release, and you may check to make sure that the left waist is not trying to contract yet, because we want to have that ability to decide, are we making this movement by lengthening and engaging the right waist, or shortening and engaging the left waist? We want to have the ability to do both. And then let's switch it around. We're still going to lengthen the right waist, but we'll lengthen the right waist by shortening the left waist. So think of Squeezing that space from the top of the hip to the bottoms of the ribs, or sometimes it's better to visualize the whole left side body from the hip to the armpit. And watch that you're not lifting the hip off the ground, so the pelvis is staying neutral on the ground, or both sides of the back of the pelvis are resting on the ground equally. And I'm shortening and feeling that lateral bend in the spine, particularly in the waist. Notice if your head starts to roll. So shortening the left side, and the right side will naturally lengthen without too much effort. Or see if you can do it without too much effort in the right side. So this is when we see if we have those gripper muscles, right? Sometimes there's certain muscles that are always trying to step in for us and do all the work. And can you lengthen your right side by shortening your left side? Just like, could you lengthen your right side from the right side? There's a lot of right and left involved here. And let the left side just stay cool and relaxed. And then find a combination of these two that feels most pleasant for you with the greatest amount of mobility. So you might slightly shorten the left side and lengthen the right side. Just feeling, think of those 5 lumbar vertebrae, and then that 12th thoracic vertebrae, side bending just a little. Our spine is meant to make this motion. It's designed for both the stira and the sukha, the steadiness and the mobility or the sweetness. The stabilization is there in the front of the spine, and the mobility is in the back of the spine. All right. So now we've explored the front to back of the waist, the lateral bend, and then the last one we do is rotation. And this we're just going to do a little bit with, because we're going to do it more in the movement itself. So draw your knees into your chest. You can stretch your low back. What we want to be cautious of when we're doing this one is that we're not letting the tailbone lift all the way up off the ground, or your buttocks. So see if you can keep, even if your thighs are out here more and your hands are behind them, keep some of that curve in your low back. So for completely flattening the low back and the buttocks is lifting, take more of your buttocks down to the ground. And then see if you can just gently drop your legs a little ways to one side. You don't want to go too far, but you'll notice that there's a rotation that takes place. And then come back to the center. If for anyone this is too much, you can do it with your feet on the ground, but you're not going to feel the waist as much as the pelvis. So with the legs brought into our body, but still that natural curve underneath us, we're just taking little dives one way, come back to the center, and then the other way. Just exploring rotation. So obviously the legs and the pelvis will rotate as well. But feel it through your waist. You might, for instance, drop your legs to the right side. Notice the lengthening through your left waist. But it's a lengthening that's happening not because we're doing a lateral bend, but feel the rotation. And just go as far as you can comfortably, supporting your legs with your hands. If you've got a lot of rotation in your waist, and don't force it, then the legs will start to come down to the ground. But you should be able to do that keeping left shoulder blades still on the ground. And you can really sense that rotation through your lumbar spine and through the bottom of the thoracic vertebrae. You're just picking them up, and we're just exploring, right? Exploring our range of motion here. So one of the things that I would caution you about is that the waist has the ability to do all these movements. Some combinations are safer than others. So just as a for instance, I'm going to come up, and you can stop exploring for a moment. Forward folding from our waist while in rotation is generally not the safest practice. So we usually do one, this is not me doing scare tactics. There are some, like I said, that are safer than others. So that particular combination, so that's where if we're leaning over to pick something up off the floor, we go straight down if we're bending from the waist versus leaning over and rotating to the side. That's where sometimes things get a little iffy. So just recognizing that. All right, now let's put this all together into a really simple one movement pattern that will explore our waist. But feel this place of what we have now defined as waist. You can even breathe into it, the space just above the navel center, right at navel center, up to the ribs. And we're going to keep our feet on the ground. You're going to sense your legs will want to help at first. But we're going to begin to press the left foot into the ground so that the left hip lifts all the way up. Buttocks off the ground. So this is going to take a little more power. I'm going to show you one and then explain what we're doing if you want to look for a moment. I'm going to lift my left buttocks off the ground, but I'm going to think of lifting my waist. Not just the buttocks, but that left waist is going to lift up. And eventually, when I lift it high enough, the right side's going to start to come off the ground. And when that happens, I'm going to push into my right leg a little bit to lift my right waist. So now if you practice yoga, you might recognize it's like I'm in a bridge pose. So I'm there, both hips are lifting, both waists are long through the sides, but there's a little bit of contraction in the backside. And I'm going to slowly let my left waist come down first. And then roll through the center of my back waist until that right hip is back down. So the movement pattern will do left lifting first and then right is you're going to lift the left waist up. And so there's a lifting, there's this little side bend that goes on. You can lengthen, right, and get that side bend. You can also feel the rotation. So the waist is doing all of those movements really. So you get it up there and then very slowly lift the right hip, drop the left hip down, let it land easily, and roll through your backside until both sides of the pelvis are equally supported and relaxed by the ground again. And just continue leading with that left hip lifting. So this probably is new to you. And if it is, you might even place your hands on your waist. So you sense yourself using those waist muscles. They're going to lengthen on the side that's lifting. They're going to contract on the side that's low. And where we definitely use the muscles in our legs and the muscles around the pelvis, because this is where our body is a continuum, right? We can't just, trying to strengthen or wake up muscles in isolation just doesn't work. We can focus on one part of the body. We can initiate from one part of the body, but everything else kicks in and we want it to. But you can focus in this area and see if you, as you're doing this, can start to be a little bit softer with the legs. So if you're really jamming your feet down into the ground, take a breath in even. Breathe into your left lung and let the breath lift the hip, or excuse me, lift the waist. So if I breathe in and say, it's just floating up, and then take another breath in. You can use that float of the breath, and then I breathe into my right waist, right lung. Float that up, and then I exhale. Drop the left waist down on the exhale, right? It's like a balloon. We're emptying the air out. And then take another exhale and drop the right waist down. So the breath can help us to use more of that waist initiative and less of the legs. Breathing in and lifting one side and then the other. And slowly dropping, feeling when the waist is lengthening, when it's finding that lateral bend, the anterior posterior tilting, all of it. And then just pause for a moment. You can either hug your knees into your chest, roll around a little bit, and take just a moment to be still in your body, continuing to define the space of your waist just from your breath, breathing into that area. So we've been paying most attention to the backside, and I think with this particular movement, that's the best place to start because we have the ground, and the ground is always, it serves as a feeler for our nervous system, right? We can feel ourselves coming off the ground. We can feel ourselves coming back to the ground. But you also might just note what's happening with the muscles in the sides. We have already done that to some extent, but in the front of the waist. So can you feel some action in your abdominal muscles? So we're going to do that same movement. This time it's going to be the right hip lifting first. So you can think of lifting your right waist. And if I was just doing my hip, it would just be that hip lifting and dropping down. So that's just hip. But I want to go all the way. I want to keep going up, right? There's that continuum. So I'm going to lift my right waist up, going really slow. Eventually the left hip will come off the ground. And then I'll float that up towards the sky. Feel when you're at that point of balance. And then slowly drop the right hip down. Let it land. Land and locate, right? And then roll through the center of the waist, the top of the sacrum, and that left hip lands again. So it's same movement. Lifting your waist, right side, and then left side. Right side takes a slow, controlled dive down, and then feel yourself go across the waist and the back slowly. So you're definitely going to feel leg muscles. I'm not saying you're not going to. You have to. But as best you can, continue from the legs. So you can even push into your feet. Continue that momentum from pushing into your feet to lifting your pelvis to lifting your rib cage. You can even think of it that way. The waist is just below the ribs, really, but lifting it up. And the ribs do attach to that 12th vertebrae in the back where our waist kind of comes to the top. And I kind of see it as a circle pattern, taking my waist in circles. If you want to see it from the front side in your mind's eye, think of your navel center. And I imagine my navel center like a flashlight, maybe even a headlamp. We'll go with the Petzl. I just got myself a new Petzl. So it's a Petzl and it's shining out. And I'm going to tilt that Petzl so I can see something to the left of me. That's my navel center. And then I'm going to shine it straight up towards the ceiling. And then I'm going to start to search. It's like a search lamp. It's going to go to the right side of me. And then coming back down and back to center grounded. So you can think of moving your navel center like it's going in a half circle, searching with that light. One of the things I find that's really important with this movement is not to rush it. It's really easy to do this, and it might feel good, but you want to give the muscles time to engage and release. So now see if you can use your breath more and inhale into your right ribs and lung. You might even feel the ribs lift first. I can feel my waist lift almost before my pelvis when I breathe into that side. Take another breath, let it rise up like a balloon, and then take a breath in my left waist. Let the left waist lift up. Take a breath out. Let the right waist drop down. Another breath out, the center of the waist drops down, and the left hip. And as you're doing these last few, and now I'm going to invite you to switch. You can go one way or the other. So you might do one left hip leading, right hip up, and then going down left to right. And then you could go the other way. Right hip leading, left hip up and down. So play with it. But as you're playing, and this is play, recognize all the mobility you have in your lumbar spine, right? The back of your waist, as well as the sides of your spine in this area. So next time someone tells us not to move from the low back, think twice about that, because a lot of times the low back, we can have low back pain, not because the hamstrings are tight. We're always told, oh, you need to go loosen your hamstrings. The hamstrings are weak, perhaps, but the tightness itself is in the muscles in the low back. We're working with something called the quadratus lumborum right now, which helps to support the sacrum, but also this lumbar area. And you're just doing one hip and then the other. Just a few more. And let yourself land whenever you're ready. For your relaxation, if you want to take your legs out, you can. If you're taking your legs out, you want a little bit more support, feel free to bring that blanket in and roll it. Put it underneath your knees. So the back of your waist is going to be most relaxed when your lumbar spine can be in its natural curve. So for some people, if our hamstrings are tighter, extending the legs will increase that lumbar curve. That's why we would put a blanket underneath the knees. It's no different than when we were forward folding from the hip crease, the lower hinge, and we had to bend our knees to keep our spine in its neutral shape, right? Versus rounding into it. Same thing lying down. We find that if there's tightness, and it could be in the back itself or in the hamstrings, we just bend the knees a little bit, and that'll keep that back waist in its neutral position. Beautiful thing about moving through the waist is we do have the breath. So if you'd like, you can place your hands on your belly just to close out this practice today. Breathe into the space of the waist, the front, the sides, even the back. So in the world of energy medicine and the subtle body, the waist is what we call a psychosomatic sphincter in the body. And we have two. We have the waist and we have the throat. The throat might be more understandable for most people because the throat is the superhighway between the brain and the heart. So we have thoughts in our head and feelings in our heart that is this sphincter that only allows what needs to go through when it's working. But when we come down to the waist, it has to do with our two main bodies, and the lower body is our body of humanness, as I call it. It's our body of survival instinct or animal instinct. And you can think of that in your own life, how that manifests. Are we always in survival mode? So everything below the waist is that space subtly. And everything above the waist is you as a thinker, as a spiritual being, as an intellectual. And it serves its purpose in only allowing what we want up into the heart, so it can help to protect the heart. But things can get stuck in the waist. And when we say stuck in the waist, we're talking about the digestive system. If you've ever felt like your stomach is upset because of an emotional reaction, it's very common, right? It's in this waist area. We get butterflies in our stomach when we're nervous. So just taking a moment to breathe in and out of the waist in a comfortable way. And recognizing the mobility you found in your waist. And I also encourage you, we're told, particularly as women, to suck it in this area, right? Don't do that. Love your waist. Love your love handles, your muffin tops, whatever you want to call them. Your Buddha belly in the front. That's inappropriate, I know, but whatever you want to call it, accept it, love it. Your low back, Low backs are not problematic. They're a beautiful space in our body. Sometimes they get crabby, as any part of our body can get crabby. So recognize when we do have a lot of pain or discomfort, and perhaps the low back, or it might manifest in your stomach, in your digestion. It may be this psychosomatic sphincter in the waist working overtime. And the simple practice we did, this one movement, really helps me to free up, so physically to lengthen the waist, but also to energetically free up that space. Thank you for practicing with me today, for lengthening your waist and taking yourself into this precious, forgotten part of your body. I recognize in the chakra system, which many people are very interested in, we have the Muladhara at the base of the spine, the root chakra, and we have the Svadhisthana, which is your low abdomen and your sacrum. So those are both placed in the pelvic bowl. And then the next one we go up to is the Manipura, which is all the way in our solar plexus up here. But there's this whole forgotten space in the center of our waist that is so important. So don't forget it. Remember, in the marma therapy, the navel center is called Nabi Marma. It's very important for our to create the heat of digestion in our body, what we call our Agni, our digestive fire, and recognize that we're not only digesting what we're putting in our bodies through our mouth. We always think of digestion as food. We are digesting everything we take in through all of our senses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, even our own thoughts that are created within. So having a strong Agni can help us to digest, to keep these things moving through that area of waist, that psychosomatic sphincter. Always helps to say nice things to your body in that area too. So if you're ready for your morning wake-up call, you can take a nice big full body yawn. Notice how your waist is lengthening, not just your hips moving or your arms or your legs, but feel that lovely place of waist. You could also hug your knees in, rock on your low back. Take your time coming up. I'm going to take my hands to my heart center and say thank you for those that are here and present with me. And I will be here for questions. So Wednesday we'll continue to look at the waist, but we'll do it in a little bit longer practice because we're going to do somatics combined with yin to stretch the waist out in the yin postures. So make sure you have props available for the yin practice. And thank you to everyone who has been supporting me, my students, through the month unlimited. You can support me on Patreon for $5 or $15 a month, and also for the generous donations I'm receiving. Thank you very much. I really appreciate doing these. Peace, joy, love, and light.